Just listen. 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 Just listen.
Lionel, glad you could make it. Can I get you a drink?
Yeah, something soft. I'm driving. Parking's an absolute nightmare around here, isn't it? Had to reverse into the tiniest of spaces. Still, I managed it. I mean, parking's not exactly brain surgery, is it? And I should know.
Why is that? Are you a doctor?
Careful. Not a doctor. I'm a brain surgeon. Big difference. Big difference. Yeah, I actually know a joke about this. What's the difference between a doctor and a brain surgeon? One's not exactly brain surgery. The other is brain surgery. So, what do you guys do?
I'm an accountant.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I could do with an accountant. Filling in those tax forms can get really confusing, can't it? Still, it's not exactly brain surgery, is it? I mean, brain surgery, believe me, is very complex. Are you an accountant too?
No, I work for a charity.
Oh, that's a very selfless job, isn't it? I really admire you. I don't think I could ever do what you do. I say that because it's emotionally draining, not because it's hard. I mean, it's not exactly brain surgery, is it? Which, as a brain surgeon, is what I do.
Lionel, here's your drink. Lionel's a brain surgeon, you know.
Yeah, he mentioned it.
Oh, Jeff, they keep you late at the Space Centre.
As always.
This food round. Have you met Lionel?
No, hello, Lionel.
So, Jeff, how do you earn a crust?
Well, I'm a scientist. I work mainly with rockets. It's pretty tough work. What do you do?
Well, I don't mean to boast, but I'm a brain surgeon.
Brain surgery? Not exactly rocket science, is it?
Greetings, Darkwood Brew, from your friends in Sedona, Arizona. Yay!
Greetings to you, Sedona, Arizona, too. Hi, welcome to Darkwood Brew. I'm Eric Ellis, your host, and Darkwood Brew is that place where we bring together ancient Christian mystical practice with modern interactive web technology, world-class jazz, arts, biblical scholarship, and, well, you never know exactly what's going to happen. Do you find yourself getting a bit exhausted lately? Too many activities, trying to balance one thing from another? Well, tonight's guest, Phileena Heuertz, is just your guest. She's the author of Pilgrimage of a Soul, Contemplative Spirituality for an Active Life. And she's done a lot of calibrating between the relationship between contemplation and activism as the director of a new center called Gravity, a Center for Contemplative Activism. And with respect to that whole complex balancing act, Phileena says...
It's not brain surgery.
There we go. So stay with us as we explore the relationship between activism and contemplation, and we'll be en route learning a little bit about centering prayer. So, but before we go any further, let's see what happened last week.
That's why you're crying? Oh, it'll be over soon, Abby. Okay? The election will be over soon, okay?
I really support our troops in Iraq and Afghanistan
and eventually North Korea, maybe Iran, and the ghetto, and the border, wherever they're needed. Join me in voting no.
I've been interested in energy work and have done some work and written a book on Reiki, healing touch, and seen it as something Christians can do and not feel bad about it, because I think wherever healing is present, we're entitled to use it, whether it be antibiotics or healing touch.
When I was in grade school, I was supposed to go on a great salmon fishing trip in Washington State, and been looking forward to it for months. And the day of, I had the flu. And one of the people who was coming along on the trip was actually a fundamentalist Christian who was friends with my dad. And he said, well, if we just pray, maybe something will happen. And he laid his hands on me, and he prayed, and I instantly felt incredibly much better. And I went on the fishing trip and was sicker than a dog.
Some of us, at least, believe it should look like it does on those faith healing services. And in many ways, they do more harm than good to the average prayer who gives up hope when something dramatic doesn't immediately happen.
I think the contemplative tradition really nurtures our ability to discern what needs to change so that we might live in greater union. Let's just start with our Christian brothers and sisters. I mean, if we could just get that figured out, then we might be able to learn how to live in unity with our brothers and sisters of all different faiths. But that's going to mess up some of the people watching this right now. I'm sure they're going to be like writing me off. But anyway, I think ego has to fall away, first of all. I think...
What do you mean by ego?
Yeah.
Just defending the faith.
Yeah, ego in the sense of it's all about me. And ego in the sense of I am the center and everything else needs to sort of be shifted and changed around me and how I see things and my perception of truth and all of that. So I think ego, has to be stripped away. And honestly, I don't know any Christian practices that incubate that or provide space to allow for that besides the Christian contemplative tradition. And I've tasted, seriously, every kind of Christianity, I think. So that's first and foremost. I think if that happens, then it becomes more obvious to us in the very practical, everyday experience of life with one another, life in our local church, how the church responds, how I respond, how the church responds to various circumstances in life and injustice and poverty and discrimination and all these things. I mean, we pick big bad issues. I mean, especially as evangelical Christians, so it's abortion or it's the gay,
you're for abortion?
Or the gay and lesbian issue or those kinds of things. We pick a few things and we just like harp on those and make those our soapbox for trying to change people, And I think as we grow in prayer and unity with God, or in awareness of our union with God, then those issues become a little bit more, we find ways to address those issues that I think come from a place of peace and a place of freedom, rather than a place of control and fear. So, yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. But I mean, how's it all going to end? There's wars and rumors of wars, and what is that all about? I mean, it's about fear and control, and you know, if we could just begin to address our own individual unconscious motivations, like what would it mean for a community to do that, or a church to do that, or you know, the state or the nation to be able to do that? Like how might we live together in a way that would be so much more beneficial and profitable, if you will, like to everyone? So more about cooperation than competition. I think contemplative prayer teaches us that.
It's a great reflection. Special thanks to Altar Video Magazine for allowing us to show that. There's a lot of clips of Phileena and her thoughts about the spiritual life up at Altar Video Magazine. So, but I thought she really articulated well, too, what we might be calling a theology of convergence, where we have people who have left behind that rigidity and ego of the conservative Christianity, joining hands with people who've left behind the dryness and ego of liberal Christianity, and kind of finding faith in a new way, in a new convergence, and
without the competition of trying to get one or the other to be what your old self was, but to come into a whole new transcendent space. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this has actually been a fairly big week for Darkwood Brew and Convergence Christianity discussions around the United States. We've had the American Baptist News Service did a big story on Convergence Christianity, and also just announced on Thursday, drum roll please, Crown Publishing, which is the owner of Random House, has just launched a new imprint, and guess what it's called? Let me put it up on the screen. Woo! Convergent. Yeah. They actually they got that name through reading the Darkwood Brew blogs about convergent Christianity, and were persuaded that they were saying that's what we're seeing too. We just didn't have a name for it, and so it's kind of exciting that we have our own. Well, we don't have our own press, but we Random House has its own press, and it's about really. It's really a good confirmation of what people are seeing clear around the United States at the grassroots, not as a major phenomenon involving 80% of all Christians, but really a significant minority within a very wide swath of Christianity. And it gives us one more place to point to for people that are thinking in the same lines.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to seeing the authors that come out of that press, and you can sign up on their website now and get on that mailing list. Also, within the Darkwood Brew sphere, we're also. I lost control of my iPad here, so you'll have to put it up out in the back there. If you put up the Sogo Media slide there, we are joining hands with this group, Sogo Media, on YouTube. You may have heard earlier in the year that YouTube is really launching a major initiative to create internet television. To make it so easy that you really, if you have an internet-connected television, you can just hit the YouTube icon and then get right onto television, but television in a new way. Television that's created on the internet, like Darkwood Brew. And they approached us a few months ago saying we'd like to feature Darkwood Brew as a primary piece of our programming. And so tomorrow, Sogo Media launches on YouTube, and Darkwood Brew will be there right with them. In fact, their very first offering is a rebroadcast of our Convergence Christianity episode,
with Brian McLaren. So get on YouTube tomorrow and check out that episode if you haven't seen it already. In subsequent weeks, we'll be going, they'll be featuring our Darkwood Brew episodes as they are actually happening. So every Monday you'll be able to see whatever Sunday's Darkwood Brew episode is. And you don't have to go to any other website. You can get to it right through our website like you always have, or go to YouTube. Either way will get you there.
Mm-hmm. Launching tomorrow is going to be very exciting. We saw a preview of that on election night a little bit, see what they were doing, and they did some wonderful stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be great.
Absolutely. Also coming up, by the way, by way of announcement, there's just all kinds of big news involving Darkwood Brew this week. We are also going to be partnering with a group called the Still Speaking Writers Group. They're a group within the United Church of Christ who's produced an amazing Advent devotional book, a daily devotional book. Whatever comes out of that group just seems, it's just phenomenal. People like Lillian Daniel and Martin Copenhaver and Tony Robinson and Donna Scrapper, and there's all kinds of really great writers with them. We're going to be featuring their devotional guide, and in our new series, their guide is called Hark, and our series is called The Herald.
And what's Christmas Eve?
And
Remember?
Christmas Eve it'll be Angels Sing. Yeah, that's right. So yeah, but this is going to be a great series. We'll be featuring members of the writers group as our Skype guests, and if you want to grab a copy of that devotional, you can order one off the United Church of Christ site at ucc.org, or if the back room will put up the donation button, if you send us a donation of any size, we will send you that for free. Just make sure you put your address down on the donation page, and we will send you one of those for free as a thank you for your gift. That way you can kind of be reading those as we get into our series. That will start December 2nd.
Yes.
So that's, a lot of news this week.
A lot of good news. Yeah. In fact, I have a request.
There's elections too and all that.
Oh, yeah, the elections. That. But I do have a request into the writers group, actually. They're gonna write a section, and if I announce it here now, you have to do it. They wrote a wonderful piece for baptism and that I use in the congregation, but the piece that I need and I want them to do is on communion. So they're coming out with more and more stuff all the time.
Yeah.
So writers group, get on that. We need that. You guys do great work, and I use it all the time, so please keep going. We have a question of the week this week. Should we get to that?
Yeah, let's do that.
The question of the week was, what does contemplation look like in your life, and what is its purpose? A little bit different twist this time from the last time. We've talked about how different people have used spiritual practices to get in that contemplative kind of mode, but now to ask, what does it mean to you, and what is its purpose is a little bit different. And we had a couple of responses from Mary Ellen Hunt Vian says, 30 minutes of mindfulness meditation in the early morning to stay in touch with reality. Now that's an open book there. I'm wondering if maybe a specific kind of intentional attitude helps frame what her reality is for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. Reality is a little more flexible than we give it credit for, I think, and we stay in touch with reality, and also I think we kind of shape that reality through our contemplative practices.
Not to say the Spirit doesn't intercede when needed, but
and not to get all new agey, like whatever you think it will happen, or anything like that. But
yeah, if you're going to make something, make up something that works, right? Right. Exactly. Robert Hurst. Contemplation gives me perspective by helping me transcend myself and experience the world from a more transcendent perspective. Sometimes meditation just leads me into the blessed sleep that I need. So what I liked about that particular one was it says sometimes
I was sleeping.
That was funny.
Nobody else here laughed, so I just
we have to support each other, yeah. Sometimes meditation puts you in a place where all kinds of wonderful things are happening, and other times it just gives you the rest and the perspective that you need to move on, take that next step into the world.
Yeah, having once in a while fallen asleep during meditation myself, I actually think that's not such a bad thing. I mean, you don't want it always to happen, but there's also some sense of being so deeply at peace that you kind of release all control over, and you do kind of drift off sometimes.
Yeah. Nancy Janik Rotman says contemplation comes through many practices in her life, from contemplative prayer, meditation, or even labyrinth. I find myself constantly contemplating whether big ideas or small concerns, and answers come whether in sudden aha moments or simply being gifted with the next footstep. I like that a lot. The next best step kind of idea.
Yeah.
Chip Keller talks about a quote from Brother Lawrence as well with some of the same idea, saying that we can contemplate it anytime and anywhere. While I do not achieve it, for me the goal is to be in constant union with the divine. So what he says is that every day in every way, it is a spiritual practice, like almost like Merton's to every breath. So Brother Lawrence's quote there is similar. And what that says to me is that sometimes there are wonderful kind of cathedral, high mountaintop kinds of experiences, and then there are other things where just a nod from a friend during the day, or a special touch, or a verse that you hear in poetry or music or something like that is the thing that sets you into a completely new place of perspective.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think that, that really the main thing is the intent to connect with God is the most important part of it all. The techniques we use are just, they're important, but they're not nearly as important as our desire, our yearning for that. I know I actually got into meditation through yoga, but then I was actually taken to a whole nother level through rock and roll meditation. Yeah, I actually developed a way to get deeper into a contemplative sense
Rush,
through listening to stuff like Rush and all this. But that's a long story. Maybe I'll write a book on it one day. But I have many techniques, not just rock and roll. and
Contemplation and centering yourselves into a new day is a good thing. So
yeah.
We'll continue that conversation throughout the week, so stay tuned.
So luckily, one of the great ways to get into a contemplative mode is through jazz music. And as the next couple minutes, we're going to invite you to do what we always like to do here, is recognize that this is not simply a web broadcast or a gathering in a coffee house, but it's also an intentional spiritual gathering where we seek to listen for and respond to the Holy Spirit. And so we invite you simply to take a deep breath in, let it out slowly, and in so doing, clear away whatever obstacles you may have brought with you to experiencing the presence of God this evening. As music plays, perhaps you'll want to especially get ready to listen, not listen simply to what's coming over the computer, but rather listen to what's coming into this processing center. And perhaps you have a question, too, that's important to you, that's specific to you, that's important enough that you'll remember it during the week. You may want to hold that question with you as we get into our episode. And then after that, Phileena Heuertz. Amen. Well, it's great to have Phileena here in the coffee house live with us, and thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Now, Phileena, you've been with a ministry called The Word Made Flesh, and I understand you're continuing activity with them. Before we get into your Center for Contemplative Activism, can you tell us a little bit about Word Made Flesh? That's a 20-year
Sure.
labor of love for you, as I recall.
Yes, definitely. Word Made Flesh really grew out of the evangelical tradition, a number of Gen Xers who came together and wanted to bring attention to God's presence and work among the world's poor. And so we grew up out of that and spent a lot of time with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and she shaped and formed us in a lot of ways. And so today there are about 13 communities all over the world serving with victims of human trafficking, former child soldiers, women and girls coming out of the commercial sex trade, kids who live on the street. And we're building communities of justice and peace for them, trying to come alongside and hear what are their aspirations and dreams and how can we join with them in the work of God in their life.
Wow, that's important work. Pretty taxing, I would imagine, emotionally and physically.
Yeah, definitely. I think we kind of stumbled into this work and didn't have really any preparation or any really any good mentors other than a number of theologians and practitioners who we would read from. But we didn't have anyone kind of coming alongside of us and teaching us this is how to be an activist in the world as a Christian. And I think we learned more subtly from people like Mother Teresa about the real gift of contemplative activism. And so we've stumbled through it over the years, lots of burnout, lots of struggles along the way, and with the center that we started, we'd like to bring in an even greater attention and depth to finding our contemplative basis to serve in the world.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I know coming from the more the mainline sphere, there's a lot of us who in the kind of engaging in progressive activism, they were just like totally burnt out after by the time you get age 50, and because you're involved in doing so many good works for Jesus, so to speak, that you've never really attended to that personal path, that spiritual fire
that's right.
that keeps burning. Is that the same? Have you seen similar dynamics in the evangelical sphere as well?
Definitely. I think we've seen three sort of characteristics of social justice type people, and that is that sadly a lot of them end up being some of the grumpiest people that we meet. They're working in some of the hardest, darkest, just most difficult places in the world, trying to bring justice and peace to a troubled world, and it's taxing, and they're grumpy. And then we see folks who do tend to burn out. And then the others are folks who, it seems that they take better care of everyone else than they take care of themselves. Right. And I often think of the wise words of Jesus, who said that the greatest commandment is to love God and love our neighbor as ourself. And I think that little nuance is something that we tend to overlook. What does it mean to love ourself, and how does that connect into loving God and loving neighbor really well?
Yeah. I actually think that's a key to this convergence Christianity, is that really convergence Christianity, at least, I mean, not that people are thinking, I want to be convergence Christian, here's what I'm going to do, but seeing what Christians are doing that are kind of in this mode seems to be no longer saying that of those three great loves, the love of God, neighbor, and self, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Instead of, so I'll just love God and myself, but not my neighbor, or I'll love God and my neighbor, but not myself. That those three really come together. They need to become together and be very organic.
That's right.
Stay alive.
That's right. And I think really contemplative prayer and the emphasis that you're giving to that in the program is so crucial to learning how to exist in that love. That is this constant communion of love of God, love of self, and love of others. It's not as if it's a hierarchical or a stage in which we must first love God, then love ourselves, then love others, or any other order you might have. It's just a constant communion, I think, that's reflective of the Trinity.
Oh, that's good. So what got you personally into creating a whole center that's devoted to this? Were there personal, not selfish, but self-loving motivations that got you to think about creating such a thing?
It's definitely been a process. I remember, I think it was 2002, sort of at the height of Chris and my work around the world, where we visited Freetown, Sierra Leone, and it was at the peak of the war over blood diamonds, and I thought I had seen as bad as it gets in the world until I made that visit and just saw the brutality of humanity and struggled to find anyone to blame, because as soon as I would try to target one who was responsible for the pain in that country, then I would find that person also had been victimized. And so I came back from that, I think, at a point of crisis of faith. And it wasn't long after that I met Thomas Keating, a Cistercian monk who's done such good work in terms of renewing the Christian contemplative tradition. And that just really changed my life, really giving myself to centering prayer as he teaches it. I began to experience a transcendent way to live in the world that became so transformational. It was like, finally, the gospel of Christ was very, very real to me in terms of just a whole transformation of my person. And then as a community in Word Made Flesh, we began to try and bring more attention to the contemplative. And in recent years, it's just seemed that this kind of work requires such full-time attention that it was important for me to step down from some of my other responsibilities with Word Made Flesh and give my full attention to developing the center.
That's wonderful. Well, I hope that like pretty much every group that's involved in nonprofit work in the United States makes use of your center and as a way of keeping that spiritual fire alive. Now, you mentioned centering prayer. Now, not everybody, a lot of people have heard of that, but not everybody is familiar with what body of techniques are used to when you associate prayer with centering prayer.
Yes. So centering prayer is really a meditative practice, right? And I like to think of contemplation or contemplative prayer in terms of apophatic prayer, which I think Carl McColman may have spoken about this.
I'm trying to lose weight, really. Apophatic doesn't.
No. I love the way that he defined that. He said apophatic prayer is prayer without image or images, and as opposed to cataphatic, which is prayer with images. And centering prayer is an apophatic practice that really teaches us how prayer can be where God is the subject of my prayer rather than the object. And I think a lot of our prayer that we're used to, God is more the object than the subject. So we are more in control, giving our prayers and requests and conversation with God. And centering prayer is a way to really let God be God and for me to learn how to yield to that presence. And so I don't know if we have time during the program to go through the sort of 3 steps of the technique, or how do you want to do that?
We do in the next segment.
Okay, great. So I can explain a little bit more there, but certainly it's an apophatic prayer practice, and it feels more like discipline than prayer as most of us are used to.
Great. Well, in fact, why don't we take a break and come back to that so we can have a little bit more time to get into that. Sure. Every week at Darkwood Brew, the centerpiece revolves around what we call Pneuma Divina. It's related to the ancient Lectio Divina practice, where you're going to be hearing a piece of scripture a couple times, or actually, rather, you're going to hear it, and then you're going to see it on the screen. And we invite you simply to listen. This is Psalm 46 we'll be hearing and seeing, and find the verse that really just kind of starts to raise itself in your awareness. What sticks in your mind for whatever reason, and then after we hear that, we'll be calling for your response to that and reflecting on that verse a little later in the episode. Let's hear from Psalm 46.
God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea. Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations God has brought on the earth. God makes wars cease to the end of the earth. God breaks the bow and shatters the spear. God burns the shields with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge.
What was that verse that seemed to lift itself off the screen or raise itself in your awareness as you heard that passage? We're going to invite you, if you are on chat, to indicate that in the little blue tab there that's appeared, says vote here. And in the coffee house, we invite you to write that on the back of your Pneuma sheets, the verse. And we'll be calling for that after our musical feature. And we turn now to Matt. He's got an introduction of a guest who's back from L.A.
Carol Rogers is joining us, doing a couple of Chuck Moronic pieces. Please. The first one is called Out of the Depths I Call to You, and the one we'll do during communion is called Feed My Lambs.
Well, thanks. And rumor has it that Carol Rogers is moving from L.A. to Omaha. So we just might be hearing from her some more as we move along in Dark Wood Brew. So thanks for joining us. Well, what was your verse now? Morris is going to be reporting. Morris, you want to come up to the table here and give us the internet results? And those of you who are in the coffee house, what was your Pneuma verse? If you hold that up, we'll see if there's any kind of consensus. I'm seeing a lot of verses 5s and 1s and 7s and 1s. Wow, you guys are kind of all over the map. Keep them up. Keep them up. Looks like 5 and 1 is pretty much dead even. I see a number of other ones. I see 6. Our producer is holding up 6. He's really voting for 6, but I'm sorry, you're kind of in a minority tonight. Thank you. You put that. So, Morris, what did you find on the internet?
The online community has clearly voted 10. Verse
10.
10.
Wow, we're a divided community tonight.
Verse 10.
Well, okay, so convergent. We're all coming together. So let's just go ahead and read 1, 5, and 10 for the moment. And by the way, one of our viewers who was online, David Miller, as soon as he wrote in the chat, he said, I heard the first line of the psalm, recognized it, and immediately felt at peace. He was grateful. And that first line, verse 1, is God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Verse 5 is God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. And finally, verse 10, be still and know that I am God. I'm exalted among the nations. I'm exalted in the earth. Well, stay with us. We're going to return to Phileena, and we'll ask her if she has anything to say about any one of those Pneuma verses. Well, Phileena, you heard 3 different verses, and I've got the feeling I know which one you might choose to comment on, because when we asked what passage we might be able to use for this episode, you selected Psalm 46, and there was a particular line you felt particularly attracted to. Was that the line that hit you this evening, or was it a different one?
Well, it's interesting. I'm very much drawn to be still and know that I am God, because I think that is such an important principle for us in our culture today. We are anything but still, and being still creates quite a bit of anxiety for most of us. So I think that this is very important for us to cultivate practices that teach us how to be still and create a way for us to even be in that anxiety if it is anxiety driven. For others of us, it's just like a big, huge, deep breath, right? To just be able to be still for a moment.
Yeah. You know, I find in my own practices, I find myself being afraid of that stillness, not because I can't be alone. In fact, I love to be alone as a polarized introvert on the Myers-Briggs scale, but I need my cave time. But actually, I find when I'm deep in meditation, I feel a sense of calm about matters that my brain, up in the more surface levels, is going crazy about, saying, you must worry, and it's my calmness that causes me then anxiety. It's like, well, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be worrying about this, and I'm seeing this though from another perspective and feeling a deep peace about this. And then so the anxiety is, do you trust the peace and trust the direction that the peace is calling you, or do you stay up in your head and get all let the rabbits and the gerbils or chasing around that wheel tell you what to do?
Yeah, I think really one of the gifts of a disciplined meditative practice like centering prayer is that it allows those deep compulsions and cravings that drive most of that chatter in our head and drive us to want to be in control and very active all the time. A practice like centering prayer allows those compulsions and cravings to be addressed, allow those to come into their proper place, so that hopefully the Spirit of God will grow within us in a way that the Spirit has more access to our active life, so that we are responding to the world instead of reacting all the time.
Yeah. So why do you suppose people are so afraid to get still? Is it is my reason, or are there other reasons that you can think of?
Well, I'm immediately drawn to my favorite teacher, Thomas Keating, who identifies these 3 programs for happiness that we often are driven by. It's kind of an over-identification with either affection and esteem, security and survival, or power and control. And when we are in a place of stillness, we are not able to really act from that place of security and survival, or power and control, or affection and esteem. In fact, we're in a place of anonymity and abandonment, and so those sort of ego patterns that like to be controlled, or be in control and be fed, are learning how to be still. So I think we're not accustomed to resting in that way, so it's difficult for us.
Yeah. Now, something in that reminded me of something I read in your book, actually, Pilgrimage of the Soul. You were talking about subjugation there, kind of you kind of coming under something as, or rather, was it subservience as being typically seen as something that is degrading to a person, but you were reinterpreting that actually in light of the more ancient tradition about receiving something. Does that strike a bell? Do you remember what?
That's an interesting perspective on the reading. But yeah, help me clarify this a little bit.
Here we go. You were talking about Peter. Peter's submission to Jesus required Peter's own admittance of his weaknesses, his need. The act of Jesus washing his feet would expose Peter's vulnerability. Submission is about receiving, but sadly society and culture have made it about subjugation.
Yeah, very much so. I think in my own personal life as a woman growing up in a very conservative evangelical home and church, and even my undergrad, I think I grew up in this culture of a woman having her particular place in society and sort of being not in a place of receiving of this type of submission, but in a place of being controlled and stifled. And submission, as we learn in a contemplative practice, is a way of receiving from the Holy Spirit, so that then we can, if you will, kind of get our orders from God and live the life that we've been called to live and be the person that we've been called to be and created to be. And so that type of submission is much more empowering and liberating than the types of submission that people of powerlessness and culture tend to be controlled by.
Yeah. That reminds me of, the Bible calls Moses the meekest man who ever lived, or most humble man who ever lived. And you think, Moses, he was no shrinking wallflower. Nobody. He was certainly nobody who just simply would allow himself to be subjugated. He was let my people go. He was confronting Pharaoh, leading the people through the wilderness, and yet he was the most humble, person on earth. And yet even the word humble, is from the Latin is from humus, of the earth, of the earth, and I'm reminded that even all of us, that's also where we get the word humanity from. Human and humus, humble. And that if we're all on a plane together, we're all of the humus, and Moses recognized that. And so Pharaoh, somebody was trying to exert himself as higher than everybody else, was no higher than himself. The only one that's higher than us is God.
That's right.
And so that is an empowering thing, not one that encourages us to be subjugating, to be humble.
That's right. And from dust we've come, and to dust we will return, right?
Yeah.
Kind of puts everything in perspective. But in the meantime, I want to be the best dust I can possibly be, right? And I want to make the most difference I can make in this world. And I think we get to be a part of this creative work of God. We get to be co-creators with God, bring in the new heaven and the new earth. And I just think life is short. Time is short. We only get a few days, hours, maybe years if we're lucky. And I think contemplative prayer, one of the gifts of contemplative prayer is that it allows us to get into that space with God, learning how to yield and give ourselves to that divine union with God, so that we can really be co-creators with God in this world.
It's beautiful. So let's talk about that, how you get into contemplative prayer, the centering prayer. What are if somebody said, I want to try centering prayer and get into that space you're talking about, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, it's so easy. I mean, it's very simple, but it's difficult for our ego. there's 3 basic steps. You just you want to come into a place, a quiet place if you can, because we're cultivating this inner solitude, silence, and stillness. So if we can cultivate that in our environment, it often helps that inner cultivation. So you want to find a seat that will allow you to be attentive and comfortable. And generally in a chair with an upright spine is really good. And then you just want to call to mind a sacred word. And that word becomes your symbol to consent to the action of God within you. And so we're not meditating on a word. The word is just a symbol. And so then as you bring that word to mind to begin your prayer, as you notice the other thoughts that are going to come your way, you just gently return to that sacred word as your symbol to consent to the action of God within you. And so a lot of people struggle with meditation because it's so difficult, and they think that maybe it's like we just want to have such a still mind and a still experience. But actually, it's going to be more chaotic probably than you would think it to be. The point is to cultivate this detachment from your thoughts. So as the thoughts come, if they come 1,000,000 times in 20 minutes and you just gently return, that is your gesture of giving God your undivided attention, just constantly returning, giving that love to God, giving your attention to God, and letting God do what only God can do in us. So that then in our active life, we notice these fruits of the Spirit more readily. And so the practice is very simple with just coming into your seat, calling your sacred word, and every time those thoughts come, just gently returning until the end of your prayer.
Okay. And so now if you do that, can you expect like the heavens to part and this big booming voice to come down to you, or what happens?
Right. And I think this is a really good point that you bring up, because it seems that society at large, or most people who are kind of dancing around mysticism or contemplation, they think it's going to be like that, right? And so I think one of the jobs we have to do is to demystify the mystic life, because it's not like that. It's much more about discipline. It's much more about giving space for that battle that St. Paul talks about between the flesh and the spirit. It's like giving some space and time for that battle to just do its work, so that the Spirit of God in us can become more active in our life, rather than being driven by those compulsions and cravings of what St. Paul refers to as flesh.
I wonder too if there has to do with dealing with that, our whole free will, in the sense that I think there's a protection mechanism that's built into our humanity to keep us from being robots, meaning that we can't just simply pray to God, I'm hoping this will happen, and then or I desire even to be with you or to hear from you, and it just happens really easily. Because if it did, it's just like there would be no barrier between ourselves as individuals and God. But that if it's true, that God will respond, but it has to be something that we truly, truly want, that we desire, that we're passionately yearning for. Then that response becomes a bit clearer or easier. It comes a bit easier, but in order to get to that state, it has to be hard.
That's right. That's right. It reminds me again of my teacher Thomas Keating, who says that when at the point of conversion, we ask the question, "What can I do for God?" And I really identify that with the past 20 years of just wanting to go into the world and do whatever I could for God.
As opposed to, what can God do to me, simply. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So that's the second question. He says, at the point when you embark on the spiritual journey, you ask, what can God do for me? And that's the difference, and that's what sets all of this apart. And I think, too, of something my husband always refers back to is the story of the blind man that Jesus met on the road to Jericho, I believe it was. And Jesus is passing by, the crowds are pressing in on him, and this man is crying out, "Jesus, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, Jesus." And certainly there were probably other people in the crowd who also wanted a piece of Jesus, right? But Jesus did stop for that man, and he asked him, "What can I do for you?" He could have, it was obvious the man was blind. He could have just immediately healed the guy. But there's something about recognizing our need and really owning that need that we have for God. And I think when we own that need, we're less likely to subjugate others and exploit others and control others. Even as Christians, we see this happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think Morris has been tracking the internet behind us here, and my guess is there's been a lot of discussion. Morris, did you find a question that for Phileena?
Yes, a lot of discussion. Morrison asked a question. He references Saint Francis de Sales, saint of Catholic saint of Geneva, who asked referenced the following issue: how does one find God how do we help ourselves find God when we leave that contemplative space? And in his question, he's addressing the context of issues. When we are addressing issues and we leave the contemplative space, how do we continue and maintain our relationship with God?
Wow. Well, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I see it in terms of the point of the contemplative prayer practice is that it is such a discipline that when we cultivate that contemplative space in the prayer period, then when we are going out from that prayer period into our normal life and addressing various issues, then it's going to be just this natural outflow of that union with God that's been cultivated.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that time spent, like I do take it in the morning, in my contemplative time, but it doesn't. There isn't like this severe barrier between the contemplative time and then the rest of the day. It's the contemplative time sets you up to listen, more carefully to the rest of the day. So the rest of the day is spent actually paying attention to the different ways that you may be sensing responses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Phileena, it's been a joy to have you on this evening. And if somebody wanted to check out Gravity, where would they go on the internet?
Oh, we're all over the place. We're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and we've got a blog. We have yet to get our website up and running, but the blog is gravitycenter.co, I believe.
Oh, this is so new. We're hitting it. Okay.
And then you can find us on Twitter, too. I believe that's gravity_center. And then at Facebook, Gravity Center, the Gravity Center, I believe it is. Yeah.
Great. Well, we look forward to seeing great things come out of that center.
Thank you.
All right. Well, coming up next, we'll be bringing our episode to a conclusion with the act of communion, the ritual communion that goes back to Jesus and even goes back even further than Jesus, an act that was originally came together in Abraham, the father of Judaism, and a priest named Melchizedek, who was of a different faith, and they found common ground together, and they celebrated that common ground through a meal of bread and wine. And of course, Jesus then picks up that bread and wine in an entirely different context. So if you happen to feel like joining us this evening in this ritual, we invite you to gather bread and wine or juice and crackers, and if you may accept this as an act of communion you share with us, or simply an act of common ground similar to that of Abraham and Melchizedek. But in whatever way you come, you are heartily invited to this table in just a moment. Well, I'm thinking about those Pneuma passages and that "Be still and know that I'm God." There was a great ritual I heard about that's actually at the California Retreat Center, where they simply take that line, "Be still and know that I'm God," and they say it in reverse, taking away one or two words each time they say it. "Be still and know that I'm God." Pause. "Be still and know that I am." Be still and know. Be still be. There's a certain stillness that comes in this ritual, in which we let go of our hopes and dreams and plunge into a reality of a broken body, of blood that was shed for us in the world. Plunge into that reality where there is deep, deep silence, where we have no choice but to be still, to be. And we take this into ourselves, in that deeply silent space. We discover that there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. That God is in the midst of this city, in the midst of this silence, in the midst of our very lives. We invite you to partake of this feast together with us, in Christ's name.
Do you love me? Then you must come to know my heart. Do you love me? Then come and take my hand. Come and make a stand with me. Do you love me? Then love me with all of your heart. The day will come when you will know that I will never let you go. And so I ask of you, feed my
thanks for joining us tonight. We hope you've found this episode helpful in some way. And next week, we will be concluding our series called Listen, Hearing That Still Small Voice and Finding Your Own, with Doug Padgett. Doug Padgett is the legendary founder of Solomon's Porch, a very interesting community in Minneapolis, and also is up to all kinds of good in this world, including hosting a special conference that Darkwood Brew is going to be an integral part of in Memphis this coming January. We keep hearing from more and more Darkwood brewers who are going to that. It's going to be about emergence Christianity, where it's headed and where it's converging. And so we'll be deep into that conversation. And if you want to join us there, get out and simply, if you put up that slide for that one there we go. There's a web address at the end. It's a little bit awkward to address, PTAF, then the JOPAgroup.com. That stands for Tony Jones and Doug Padgett, Joe Pa. So go out there and get online, register, and meet us in Minneapolis. But we'll be hearing from Doug next week, and probably we'll show a couple pictures from inside of his sanctuary. I've always said, since I was there many years ago, that if when you die, you go to heaven, you get to worship God forever. I want to worship in exactly his sanctuary. So what does that sanctuary look like? Well, we'll have to show you next week. But until then, my friends, may the Spirit of the living God, made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong companion, and dwell inside you to remind you that you are surely not alone, and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.